Hey everyone, welcome back to Mimi Leaks. If you're new, then welcome. Please subscribe if you enjoy content that covers complaints and allegations in open and active lawsuits. Today, we're continuing our coverage of the WWE lawsuit, specifically the statement of facts in the complaint as alleged by plaintiffs John Does 1 through 5. We will also look at claims that several of the Ringboys had revealed abuse and SA of minors within the WWE. Before we start, a trigger warning: this complaint is quite detailed in its allegations of inappropriateness, abuse, and SA of underage boys. Now let's get started as I pick up where we last left off, the claims that multiple WWE wrestlers knew of Phillips' inappropriate behavior. In addition to the highest level executives, multiple WWE wrestlers knew about Mel Phillips' abuse of the Ringboys. A. Jake the Snake Roberts, a former professional wrestler with WWE from 1986 through 1992, and again from 96 to 97, said during an interview regarding the Ringboy scandal that it was all true, particularly involving Phillips and Terry Garvin. He specified that he knew it was going on and that it made him sick. He said, "The story goes that Gorilla Monsoon caught Phillips putting his figure 4 on some kid and sucking his toes. Pretty disgusting." B. Sid Raymond Udy, a former professional wrestler under the ring names Sid Justice, Sid Vicious, and Psycho Sid, who was with the WWE from 1991 to 92, described an instance when there was a group of young boys outside the hotel. He asked the Warlord, another former wrestler with WWE from 88 to 92, what they were doing there, and the Warlord said that the ring announcer, Mel Phillips, was getting the kids tickets to the show tonight, and before the show, he takes them to the hotel room and plays with their feet. Sid added, "I can tell you a million stories like that." C. Greg the Hammer Valentine, a former professional wrestler with WWE from 1978 to 79, 81 to 82, and 84 to 92, said he heard about Phillips sucking on toes and that he heard a lot of strange things that happened with the Ringboys. Before it became public in 1992, quote, "No one cared, if he wants to suck them toes, let him," unquote. But he did hear that Phillips got some younger kids involved and said there's definitely a big problem with that. D. Sabu, a former professional wrestler with various promotions in the 1980s and with WWE in 93, said that WWE at the time would hire ring crew guys under 18 and that Mel Phillips was a pervert. Phillips had every kid in town, according to Sabu, and that's why he was so notorious. And Phillips was a foot guy, and that he would use boys' feet for pleasure. He didn't deny it, Sabu said. He just faded away. E. Shane Douglas, a former professional wrestler with WWE in and around 1986, remembers that on a flight from California to Honolulu, he saw a couple younger kids join Mel on the plane. Then, during the flight, when most people were asleep, he walked past Mel's seat and saw Mel stare at him with a blanket pulled up to his chin, and saw the blanket moving up and down near his private areas, which appeared to be Mel engaging in an act under the blanket with one of the younger boys on the plane. F. The Honky Tonk Man, a former professional wrestler with WWE from 1986 to 91, talked a lot about the abuse going on with the Ringboys. G. Brickhouse Brown, a former professional wrestler with multiple promotions, including WWE in the summer of 1986, informed professional wrestler Rob Van Dam, who was with WWE from approximately 2001 to 2007, and other wrestlers about Phillips molesting the Ringboys and other harassment by WWE executives Patterson and Garvin. H. Gorilla Monsoon, a former professional wrestler, commentator, and backstage manager for WWE during the 80s and 90s, said during a taping, as Mel Phillips would say, "That match will knock your socks off," seemingly in a reference to Phillips' foot fetish. I. Tito Santana, a former professional wrestler with WWE in 1979 to 80 and 1983 to 93, wrote about Phillips in his book Don't Call Me Chico, describing Phillips as in charge of the ring crew and seeing him, quote, with his collection of local ring boys. Phillips brought them to the show to help set up chairs and the whole deal. Wherever the WWF went, Mel Phillips added to his list of teen helpers from broken homes and troubled backgrounds, unquote. Santana saw Phillips wrestling with the Ring Boys. WWE Hall of Fame wrestler Bret Hart gave an interview for the Mr. McMahon docuseries, and that's where he said, quote, Mel Phillips was a total pedophile that preyed on young boys, and if these young boys weren't complying with his requests for favors, they weren't hired, unquote. Hart also claimed in his 2007 biography, Hitman, My Real Life in the Cartoon World of Wrestling, that both Garvin and Phillips, as well as Pat Patterson, resigned as a result of the allegations of misconduct. Hart detailed an incident involving Phillips engaging in unwanted conduct that then became known to Vince McMahon, Pat Patterson, and other wrestlers. And that is on the screen right now. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, Vince arrived with Pat, Howard Finkel, Terry Garvin, and a black ring announcer named Mel Phillips. Mel was something of a whipping boy for all of them, and before long, Vince and Pat were doing everything they could to get Stu to stretch him in the dungeon. Stu thought they only wanted to make fun of Mel, and at first he wouldn't go for it. A couple of months later, on a ring bus somewhere in Europe, Mike Tomei, a rookie referee, made the mistake of confiding to Jacques Rougeau, that one night when he shared a room with Mel Phillips, that he was awakened by Mel straddling him buck naked at the foot of the bed, sucking hard on his big toe. Then what happened? Jacques asked. Mike said, I told him I didn't like it and to stop, and he did. Between fits of laughter, Jacques told everybody on the bus. Of course, none of us could stop laughing either. When we got back to the States, I had little choice but to immortalize the incident on the blackboard, adding Mel to the long-standing, ever-changing orgy with Princess Toma and Chief. Mic in hand and still wearing his announcing studio, Phillips hung by his lips from the Chief's big toe. That was a big hit with the boy, so I drew it everywhere for a while. After an hour of prodding from Vince and Pat, Stu was finally persuaded to get his hooks on Mel. From the kitchen, we could hear sharp screams, followed by giddy laughter and grunting coming from upstairs. I hurried down to find Mel stripped down to his undershirt, slacks, and socks, and inquired whether he wanted Stu to show him how to put him in a flying toe hold. Neither Vince nor Pat wanted to get too close. Stu stretching either one of them would have been a beautiful thing to watch, and they knew it. Stu let Mel off the hook easy enough, though. And then it continues, climbing him off like a forgiving spider. It turned out to be a wonderful evening for everyone, except maybe for Mel Phillips. WWE's executives, particularly Terry Garvin and Pat Patterson, also knew or should have known about Phillips' misconduct. Indeed, Garvin and Patterson were allegedly engaged in similar misconduct and were part of the pedophile ring, as stated by Mushnick. In a New York Times best-selling book titled S, Lies, and Headlocks, The Real Story of Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Entertainment, Nelson Swagler, who was WWE's company operations manager, remembers walking into a bus and seeing Garvin hard at it with one of the ring boys. He's saying, these kids that were usually from broken homes, whose parents would only be glad to send them off to do a day's work. Everyone knew what was going on, but it wouldn't have taken someone within the Brotherhood to have moved on it, and none of the people who knew about it moved on it. In 1992, on the Phil Donahue Show, Tom Hankins, Bruno Sammartino, superstar Billy Graham, and Barry Orton, all former wrestlers, all confronted Vince McMahon by airing claims of alleged misconduct by WWE employees, particularly Terry Garvin, Pat Patterson, and Mel Phillips, who by that time had all been let go by the company. Orton discussed being propositioned in 1978 at 19 years old. Orton also said that he had heard stories with Garvin and underage kids, and that this kind of conduct was common and a topic of conversation every night in the dressing room because the guys had to put up with the harassment and hated it because if they were to say anything, they'd be out of a job. Orton also discussed car rides where Patterson and Garvin had groped him, as well as Patterson standing outside the wrestler's shower area where Patterson would lurk and lick his lips. Orton passed a polygraph regarding his allegations, and he also stated that Vince McMahon knew about it because he is, quote, king of the empire and has eyes and ears everywhere, unquote. During the show, Vince McMahon admitted that there's a possibility of harassment at WWE. Orton maintained that he never moved up in the organization because he spoke out about what happened. He also said that a ring boy came up to him in Chicago and asked what he should do about Garvin's harassment. Former wrestler Billy Graham stated the following in a March 3, 1992 interview with Tom Cole's first attorney. "Oh, well, I've never seen an actual homosexual act between a ring boy or Terry Garvin or Pat Patterson or Mel Phillips, but I knew that they controlled them. I knew that they would come up, and I have seen many occasions when a ring boy would be walking by and like myself walking to the arena early or something, and Pat Patterson or Terry Garvin were there around the ring, and I would see them and bend over and grab their behind in a suggestive manner. And it seemed like they had like total dominance over these kids, and it was common knowledge, It was very common knowledge that these kids were being used as pawns for Mel Phillips and Pat Patterson and Terry Garvin." Question. Okay, do you think in a sense that these youngsters were preyed upon by the owners and management of the WWF then? Answer. Yes, there's no question that they were preyed upon. They were preyed upon us, yes, they were victims. They were preyed upon and they were victims, they were victimized. This homosexual harassment, they were victimized by these employees of the WWF and knowingly victimized by Vince McMahon. Other former WWE wrestlers have spoken out about the harassment from WWE executives. Brickhouse Brown detailed an incident when Pat Patterson propositioned him in an elevator, which disturbed him. Brown then told every wrestler friend of his what had happened. Example, famous wrestlers Macho Man and Ric Flair, who all asked him, "Well, how bad do you want it for your career?" and told him sometimes you have to play the game. In other words, engage in certain favors. Tony Garea told him, "Sometimes it's not who you know, it's who you blow." Brickhouse Brown didn't go to Vince McMahon about Patterson because he felt like Vince had already known what was going on and Vince would probably take Patterson's side since he was replaceable, he being Brickhouse, but Patterson wasn't. Shane Douglas described an incident in the locker room when Patterson touched him inappropriately in his private area and said that it was fairly common in the wrestler's dressing room to hear these types of stories. WWE Hall of Famer Anthony White, Tony Atlas, said during an interview for the Mr. McMahon docuseries, "We all knew Pat Patterson was doing this stuff. I didn't like him because he kept grabbing at my private area in the locker room." When asked if the wrestlers complained, he said, quote, "To who? Pat is the booker and the number 2 guy in the office. There's nobody to go to, son. You either take it or you go home," unquote. Former wrestler Dutch Mantell, who was with several wrestling promotions during the WWE in the mid-1990s, described such stories and the situation in those days as just a day at the office. In 1992, on the show Now It Can Be Told, several people were interviewed about an alleged harassment within WWE. Michael Clark, a former referee of multiple years, and Rita Chatterton, the first female referee. Their allegations involved a casting couch for wrestlers, in other words, favors in exchange for money, jobs, and promotions, and executives taking the Ringboys on the road as young companions. Clark said that on his first day of full-time work in 1987 for the WWE, his boss told him if he had any problems with Patterson or Garvin to come to him, suggesting that he knew about their actions. Clark claimed that Garvin asked him to perform an intimate act on Garvin in exchange for Garvin getting Clark booked as a referee throughout Canada, getting Clark a green card so he could work in the United States, and also giving him $500. When Clark refused, his career with the WWE was over. Clark claimed there were a crew of referees and Ringboys who were being coerced to perform certain favors for WWE management, headed by Garvin and Patterson, who were known as, quote, the Cream Team, unquote. Clark called Phillips the sickest of all the three. In a recent interview in 2024 with News Nation, former professional wrestler Paul Roma, who was with the WWE from 1984 until around 91, commented that he had heard misconduct allegations on a regular basis, including the people Vince McMahon had surrounding him. McMahon had a lot of people around him, like vice presidents and bookers, that were very much into abusive and harassive behavior and put wrestlers in a bad situation. Some wrestlers, including Roma's former partner, walked away after being asked to do favors with other men, either do it or get fired. He said that it had to be the WWE executives propositioning wrestlers because they're the ones who could and did offer the wrestlers money or jobs. When WWE released a History of WWE DVD, it edited out Phillips by showing the historic WrestleMania 3 match between Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, only for a singular camera angle and without commentary. An allegedly reliable source from WWE said that the odd editing was due to the presence of Phillips in the background of that match. Phillips has supposedly also been edited out of other WWE archived video footage. Such editing, particularly of such a historic event, is the WWE's further acknowledgement of Phillips' misconduct and WWE's attempt to scrub Phillips from its history in order to protect the business at all costs. There were also reports that Phillips was edited out of various shows on WWE's streaming video platform, including an October 1983 show at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. Before WWE tried to scrub Phillips from its dark history, Phillips was a prominent and highly visible employee. The foregoing admissions and accounts established not only that defendants knew or should have known about Phillips' harassment and abuse of the Ringboys, but that the defendants failed to protect them and knowingly fostered and allowed a culture of misconduct to permeate the WWE, which empowered Phillips, Patterson, and Garvin to abuse underage boys, including the plaintiffs. B. Several Ringboys previously revealed abuse of minors within WWE, including by Phillips. On May 4, 1992, John Arezzi published a Pro Wrestling Spotlight newsletter in which he wrote a column called Matt Memories, detailing his personal memories of Phillips going back all the way to the 1970s. Arezzi described Phillips as being in the middle of the most sickening scandal in the history of professional wrestling. In the mid-1970s, Arezzi met Phillips when Phillips was a ring boy for the WWE, and his goal was to be a ring announcer. He and Phillips became friends, and Phillips later visited Arezzi at college where Arezzi, quote, began to notice a strange habit of Mel's. He would always seek out one of his best friends at school and wrestle him, unquote. When spending New Year's Eve of 1975 with Arezzi and his family, Phillips showed off a new videotape camera and recorder, which was rare for consumers at the time. During the summer of '76, Phillips visited Arezzi in New York on a handful of occasions and was accompanied on those trips by a young boy about 15 years old. When he questions Phillips about the boy, Phillips said that the kid was underprivileged with a bad home life, and Phillips was looking out for him. During those visits, Phillips would always wind up wrestling with Arezzi's neighbors, two young boys, according to Arezzi. From the winter of '76 through the next few years, Arezzi noticed Phillips around more and more young boys, which seemed strange. After January of '78, when Arezzi traveled to the Northeast, he would bump into Phillips, who, quote, was always preoccupied with his group of Ringboys that he was now supervising. I just hope Phillips seeks some professional help," unquote. On July 24, 1992, three-count professional wrestling newsletter published an article called "Spotlight on Cheryl Vasquez," which detailed a July 12, 1992 conversation between Ms. Vasquez and the host of Wrestle Talk, a radio show. Ms. Vasquez, a mother, led a protest at a WWE event in New York because of abuse allegations by the Ringboys. She described how she knew and befriended many of the underage Ringboys from the upstate New York area, many of whom came from dysfunctional families, due to attending WWE shows with her own kids, where they would all try to get photographs and pictures with the wrestlers. Many times, she went with her kids to the restaurants where the wrestlers and Vince McMahon would eat after the shows, and Phillips would also be present with Ringboys. She asked the Ringboys why they were always with him, and they told her they were staying in hotels with him, which was particularly strange for the Ringboys who lived in the area. She also learned that they sometimes went to WWE offices in Connecticut, or one office in Connecticut, where there was a big blow-up doll named Big John. She felt like the kids she knew were victims, and she provided information to the authorities. She contacted one such Ringboy, who she met about 7 years prior, about attending her 1992 protest, but he told her he was in contact with the then-suspended Mel Phillips and the WWE's attorney, Jerry McDevitt, and that he was no longer allowed to talk to her. In 1992, Tom Cole and Chris Loss, two former Ringboys, went public with accusations of abuse that occurred when they were minors, just one small chapter in the widespread Ringboy abuse scandal. In a recent book called Ringmaster, Vince McMahon and the Unmaking of America, author Abraham Josephine Reisman recounts the allegations of Tom Cole from the early 1990s. When Cole was 13 years old, he met Phillips, became a Ringboy, and Phillips soon took him to wrestling shows in multiple cities, including New York, Baltimore, Boston, and Philadelphia. Phillips had young boys waiting for him at the show. Years later, in a draft legal complaint, Cole alleged that Phillips would frequently caress his feet and rub him against Phillips' genitals. In March 1992, Cole's attorney sent the draft complaint to WWE counsel Jerry McDevitt, setting out the allegations by Cole. Allegations were substantially similar to the allegations in the FBI investigation and the allegations of the plaintiffs herein. Cole alleged he was employed as a per diem Ringboy from 1985 until February 1990. It also detailed that he was not the only one who was subjected to the misconduct of Phillips and others. Cole was terminated after he refused to engage in certain acts with Terry Garvin. Cole described Mel Phillips as having a black book with names of kids from all over the country. Phillips would call these young boys when he was in a specific town and ask them if they wanted to go to shows as a way of grooming them for abuse. Cole further stated in an interview that Pat Patterson would make gestures to him and touch his genitals and buttocks. Cole also alleged in the draft legal complaint that Terry Garvin solicited activity from him in '88 when he was just 16 years old. Cole contacted another former Ringboy, Chris Loss, who had a similar experience of being recruited by Phillips at a young age and having his feet fondled. They both went public to the San Diego Union Tribune in 1992, with Loss stating, among other things, quote, "Boys are getting propositioned and played with all the time. You sort of put up with it because you make a lot of money," unquote. After Cole's attorney faxed a courtesy copy of a threatened lawsuit to Vince McMahon's attorney, the parties met in person in or around March 1992 to discuss settlement. After that, Cole met with Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon, and WWE counsel Jerry McDevitt, who influenced the young Cole to accept $55,000 in back pay and being rehired at WWE in exchange for dropping the anticipated lawsuit. One aspect of the deal was that Vince promised Cole that Patterson, Garvin, and Phillips would not be part of the WWE any longer. Vince later begged Cole to allow Patterson to return. At points during that meeting, Cole's new attorney left the room. When his attorney was absent, McMahon convinced Cole to take the deal. The parties continued to discuss the details of the deal. During that meeting, Vince confided to Cole that he, Vince, had also been molested as a child, and that's why he knew what the young Cole was going through. At a subsequent meeting at WWE headquarters, Cole was isolated with Linda McMahon, where Linda asked Cole what the passcode was for his brother's answering machine. Cole and his brother were living together at the time. On information and belief, the McMahons then accessed the answering machine and learned information that they later used against Cole. During discussions, Linda told Cole that she believed there was something wrong with Phillips and Garvin. During a later meeting with Cole, Linda McMahon commented that they wanted to make things right with Cole. Linda McMahon had a direct role in the settlement, including having her name on the payment memorandum for Cole's back pay, and that was instrumental in influencing Cole to stay quiet and accept the deal. Cole's rehiring by WWE did not last long. He was fired by Linda McMahon shortly thereafter. When she later ran for Senate, she contacted Cole and thanked him for not speaking out further. Linda McMahon manipulated Tom Cole to get him to provide her information about the other individuals speaking out against the Ringboys scandal, so that she could make backdoor agreements to those individuals who would later recant their negative statements about WWE, the McMahons, and the sexual harassment and abuse of Phillips, Patterson, and Garvin. A friend of Chris Loss's, who would sometimes accompany him to WWE shows, said that Phillips would put the boys in between his legs up near his groin area. According to the transcript of an interview with Loss conducted in 1992 by Cole's attorney, the friend said Phillips showed them videotapes of teens wrestling in his backyard ring and spoke about a nationwide network of friends he liked to wrestle with. Quote, "He told us that he has done it to a lot of different people. He said that he has friends in over in different states that would help him, and he has done it to them. He told us that," unquote. In 1999, Scott Hopkins filed a lawsuit against Titan Sports, Inc., another prior incarnation of WWE, and Phillips, for injuries caused to him as a result of the defendant Mel Phillips' abuse of the plaintiff, Scott Hopkins, when he was a minor child. Hopkins' complaint detailed how he met Phillips in May of 1985 at a wrestling event, and Phillips told him he could get in for free and go backstage with the wrestlers if Hopkins helped set up the ring. But during construction of the ring, Phillips would take Hopkins aside and play a game with him, which entailed of Phillips sitting on top of Hopkins, taking his socks off and rubbing Hopkins' feet and toes against Phillips' private area, and pulling Hopkins' toes apart until he screamed. Phillips offered to take Hopkins to other wrestling events, and he even met with Hopkins' parents to assure them that their child would be safe and well cared for at the events. Hopkins further alleged in the complaint that Titan Sports, WWE, provided Phillips with a private room at the wrestling events. Phillips took Hopkins to additional wrestling events throughout 1986 and the spring of '87, and Phillips shared a room with Hopkins multiple times where he would rub Hopkins' genitals. He alleged that Titan Sports, WWE, knew or should have known, that Phillips engaged in contact with Hopkins, as well as other young children, and that Titan Sports facilitated the abuse by providing Phillips with a private room and failing to take reasonable steps to prevent the abuse. The court denied Titan Sports' motion to dismiss, and about 5 months later, all parties stipulated to a dismissal. On information and belief, a settlement was reached because Hopkins cited a confidentiality agreement when contacted by Business Insider about the suit. And we will continue the next episode here. Thanks for tuning in. This case brings up some difficult but necessary conversations about accountability, safety, and the hidden realities in the wrestling world. If this episode shed some light for you, give it a like, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next installment in this series. Until next time, take care, stay informed.